Shabbat Shalom. As we enter this final week of the Hebrew month of Sivan and look back upon the events of the last several weeks, we're justified in feeling angry, sad, and perhaps even a little afraid. But we should not feel surprise. The terrorist organization Hamas launched thousands, not some, not hundreds, but thousands of rockets against the Jewish state. Armaments funded by the Iranians and by monies intended for humanitarian aid that the terrorists gathered and prepared for several years. Then, when Israel sought to defend itself, we saw that Hamas continues to place its weapons in schools and residential buildings in order to maximize the number of civilian casualties so that Israel looks like the aggressor in the naive eyes of the world. We saw long-planned Palestinian riots on the Temple Mount, and Israeli police walk right into the trap. We saw Arab Israelis attacking their Jewish Israeli neighbors. Perhaps worst of all, we saw some Jewish Israelis attacking their Arab Israeli neighbors. We are justified in feeling angry, sad, and perhaps even a little afraid, but we should not feel surprised. Neighbors attacking neighbors was not limited to Israel either. In New York, in California, in Florida, and elsewhere, Jew haters violently attacked our brothers and sisters. According to the ADL, in the days following the recent outbreak of violence in the Middle East, more than 17,000 tweets used variations of the phrase, "Hitler was right." The ADL documented dozens of anti-Israel protests in the US and nearly 200 reports of anti-Semitic acts. In Skokie, Illinois, a group of about 20 pro-Palestinian demonstrators chanted Intifada, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, across the street from a synagogue. As this month of Sivan ends in the next several days, I think that we're justified in feeling angry, sad, and perhaps even a little afraid. But we should not feel surprise. After all, if our own local Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib can call for the destruction of the Jewish state by tweeting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," then we should not be surprised that others feel emboldened to similarly call for and work toward the destruction of Israel and of the Jews. Yes, we are angry, sad, and perhaps even a little afraid when the enemies of the Jewish people call for our annihilation, take active steps toward our demise. But we should not feel surprise. We should also not be surprised that Jews and non-Jews alike challenge Israeli policy as it pertains to the relationship between Jews and Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. Israelis challenge Israeli policy as it pertains to Judea and Samaria, which is why in recent years they voted in multiple elections, and which is why a new coalition most likely will control the Knesset in the coming weeks. A coalition in which, for the first time, an Arab political party will be represented. A democracy relies on healthy debate, and Jewish tradition mandates healthy debate. To question governmental policy is profoundly Jewish. To question the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state is profoundly anti-Semitic. After the events of recent weeks, we are justified in feeling angry, sad, and perhaps even a little afraid, but we should not feel surprise. We should also not feel surprised when the organization, but not the movement, Black Lives Matter, announced Black Lives Matter stands in solidarity with Palestinians. The announcement continues, "We're a movement committed to ending settler colonialism in all forms and will continue to advocate for Palestinian liberation." Then BLM added, "Always have and always will," along with the hashtag Free Palestine. These sentiments appeared several years ago as part of the BLM platform, but were later removed. Perhaps naively or perhaps optimistically, I, among others, thought that the organization saw the error of its ways. I was wrong. And yes, I am sad and angry about it, and even a little afraid. But no, I guess I'm not surprised. We should not be surprised that the people and the organizations with whom we Jews protested side by side against racism, against homophobia, against white supremacy, against misogyny, against crass and hateful rhetoric, turned against Israel and then against the Jews. When we speak in the language of power, when we make blanket statements about who is strong and who is vulnerable, there are bound to be disagreements. We Americans possess short memories and weak knowledge of history. When those with whom we march turn against us, it is because they perceive Israel and the Jews as strong, while we perceive Israel and the Jews as vulnerable. Perception matters. In our Torah portion this week, Parshat Shalach Lecha, the Israelites were only 2 years into their exodus from Egypt and had already come to the borders of the Promised Land. Moses sent forth 12 scouts with the direct orders to bring back facts, but they returned with opinion. 10 of the scouts announced before the entire Israelite nation, "We cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we. The country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers." The scouts added, "All the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them." Our ancestors perceived themselves as vulnerable, as powerless against the occupiers of the Promised Land, and so they were. The spies returned from their mission on the 8th day of Av and spread their doubts on the 9th day of Av. Because of their faithlessness in God and in themselves, the Holy One sentenced the entire nation to die in the wilderness over the course of 38 more years of journeying. Only their children born in freedom were to enter Israel. The day the spies spread their faithlessness, the 9th of Av, or Tisha B'Av, became a day of tragedy that repeated itself generation after generation. When we lack faith in God, when we lack faith in ourselves, the Jews suffer. When we allow others to control the perception of the Jewish people, when they declare us oppressors, when they compare us to vermin, when the world tolerates violence or slander against the Jews or the Jewish state in the name of misguided justice, we're vulnerable. Jews suffer. When I was a student at the University of Michigan, I attended a lecture by one of Israel's peace negotiators. He explained the strategy of negotiation. Each side strives to argue that it is the David against the other's Goliath, he told us. Perception matters. Of course, truth matters too. Anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred, runs deep and must be countered by facts, by teaching, by writing letters, by protesting, and perhaps most of all, through friendships and not just allyships. Jews and the Jewish state are vulnerable, but perhaps for the first time in history, we possess shields. And I'm talking about more than just the Iron Dome, but thank God for that shield. In the midst of the recent conflict in Israel, Father Chris Yaw of St. David's Episcopal Church in Southfield and head of the interfaith Lift Up Southfield group, of which I'm a part, saw my Facebook posts about defending our brothers and sisters, our family in Israel. He picked up the phone and called me. "Reb," he said, as he likes to call me. "Reb, how are you doing through all this? How's your family doing? It must be so hard." We spoke, and I told him about my anger, my sadness, my fear, and how nevertheless, I'm not surprised. Father Chris invited me to church, and so the following Sunday, I zoomed in, wearing my Sunday best. No, it wasn't for prayers. In front of his church, Father Chris engaged me in discussion so that I could teach about Israel and about the conflict. My friend shared with me his pulpit so that I could educate and so that I could provide perspective. That is not allyship over some shared cause. That is one friend caring for another friend. That is one seeker of truth and justice, one committed to compassion and kindness, allowing another seeker of truth and justice, another committed to compassion and kindness, a platform for fellowship. As this Hebrew month of Sivan comes to an end, we can choose to focus on the rockets or the violence or the vandalism. In so doing, we will continue to feel anger and sadness, perhaps even some fear, but we should not feel surprise. Anti-Semitism should never surprise us, and we must always remain vigilant to how others perceive us. As we look ahead to Tammuz, though, we can also choose to focus on the numerous examples of Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs coming together. We can choose to focus on the Arabs who cleaned up a desecrated synagogue in Lod. We can focus on the Jews who restored an Arab shop vandalized by Jewish hoodlums. We can choose to focus on our Gentile friends who reach out with care and with compassion, who stand up for the Jews and the Jewish state. We can choose to speak up and to speak out, marching peacefully, writing letters to newspapers and other media outlets, calling our elected officials, educating ourselves and those closest to us. We can show more tolerance and listen more closely to those who question Israeli governmental policy. In the coming weeks and months, we can also choose to deepen our Jewish practice and our Jewish learning, reminding ourselves, our children and our grandchildren, our friends, of the meaningfulness that Jewish living offers and the wisdom that Judaism provides in navigating the challenging world in which we live. Perception matters. Faith matters more. As Sivan gives way to Tammuz, I will not let the haters win. I will not let the ignorant win. Despite the statements of Black Lives Matter, I will continue to protest against racism because racism is wrong, because people of color are part of the Jewish family, and because as a Jew, I must pursue justice. I will continue to protest against homophobia, against white supremacy, against misogyny, against crass and hateful rhetoric, because discrimination is wrong, because those attacks are against my Jewish family too, and because as a Jew, I must seek compassion and kindness for all people. I will also seek to educate our allies, to speak out and to speak up for Jews and for the Jewish state. I will deepen my friendships. I will live my Judaism proudly and joyfully, with words of hope and blessing on my lips, always with words of hope and blessing on my lips. I will not see myself as a grasshopper and them as giants, and I will not allow them to see me as Goliath as compared to their David. I will also accept the truth that in so many cases, I cannot honestly call myself David either. I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors, so I will not let anti-Semitism defeat us, nor will I let anti-Semitism define us. We cannot feel surprised, but we can also not become complacent. We are sad, we're angry, we're afraid, we're vulnerable. We are also strong, we're emboldened, we are proud, and we have a voice. We're blessed, we're together. We are Jews. Shabbat Shalom.